I was lying in that hospital bed, pretending to sleep, when I heard my oldest son James say to his sister, 8 million split 3 ways. We just need to wait for the old man to croak. That was the moment I realized I had raised monsters. Let me back up. My name is Richard Thompson. I'm 62 years old, and up until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had done everything right. I spent 35 years as a cardiothoracic surgeon in Manhattan, working 80-hour weeks, missing birthdays and soccer games, all so my 3 kids could have the best of everything. Private schools, Ivy League colleges, trust funds, the works. My wife Sarah died 2 years ago from ovarian cancer. Those last 6 months, I took a leave of absence to care for her. She was the love of my life, and watching her fade away nearly destroyed me. But in those final days, she held my hand and said something I didn't understand at the time. Richard, promise me you won't let them take advantage of you. You're too soft. They need to learn what we never taught them. I promised, but I didn't know what she meant. Our kids were successful. James was an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. Jennifer ran some kind of wellness business, always posting pictures of green smoothies and yoga poses on Instagram. David was working on his third startup, some app that was going to revolutionize something or other. They seemed fine. Then came October 23rd. I was on my morning jog through Central Park, same route I'd taken for 20 years, when I felt the elephant sit on my chest. By the time I hit the ground, I knew exactly what was happening. Massive myocardial infarction, the kind I'd spent 3 decades fixing in other people. I woke up 2 days later in Mount Sinai's cardiac ICU, the same hospital where I used to work. The irony wasn't lost on me. My kids were there, standing around my bed, and for a moment I felt this wash of love and relief. They came, they cared. Then I heard Jennifer whisper to James, "How long before we can talk to his lawyer?" I kept my eyes closed. Something in her tone made my skin crawl. "Mom's been gone 2 years," James whispered back. "Everything should be straightforward. The Manhattan apartment alone is worth 4 million, plus the pension, the stocks, the summer house in the Hamptons. What about Dad's wishes? That was David, my youngest. He always said he wanted to donate to the hospital's cardiac research fund." "Fuck his wishes," James hissed. "We earned this money putting up with his boring surgery stories and his constant guilt trips about working too much. Besides, he's old. What's he need 8 million for? To play golf and watch the news?" I felt like someone had opened my chest again without anesthesia, but I kept my eyes shut, kept my breathing even. Years of controlling my emotions in the OR helped. I could hear Jennifer shifting on her feet. "James, keep your voice down," she said, but she didn't disagree with him. "When do we talk about the nursing home?" That was Lisa, James's wife. I'd never liked her, and now I knew my instincts were right. We can't have him living in that massive apartment alone. He could fall, hurt himself. It's a liability. "Once he's stable, we present a united front," James said. "Tell him it's for his own good. Get power of attorney while he's weak. Then we list the apartment, sell the summer house, liquidate the stocks, split everything 3 ways. David didn't say anything. That gave me the smallest sliver of hope. Maybe he wasn't completely gone. A nurse came in then, checking my vitals. I kept up the act, but I felt her pause. When the kids stepped out for coffee, she leaned close. "Mr. Thompson, I know you're awake." My eyes snapped open. She was a woman in her 50s, kind face, name tag that said Linda Chen. "I'm not going to tell anyone," she said quietly, but I heard what they were saying. My own parents went through something similar with my brother. By the time they realized what he was doing, he'd convinced them to sign over their house. They died in a state facility. Her eyes were hard. "If you need help, I'll help you." "Why?" I managed to croak out. "Because I've seen too many families like yours come through here. The kids who only show up when they smell money. You deserve better." She glanced at the door. "Your cardiologist says you're stable enough to be discharged in a few days. What you do then is up to you." Over the next 72 hours, I played possum while my children revealed who they really were. Jennifer came by with her business partner, talking about how she desperately needed a cash infusion to save her wellness brand. Apparently, she was $300,000 in debt. David visited alone, looking guilty, but still talked to James on the phone about Dad's assets and when we could access them. But the worst was James and Lisa. They brought a real estate agent to the hospital. Actually walked him past my room, discussing the apartment's value, the best time to list, whether to stage it or sell as is. On day 4, my old friend Tom visited. Tom and I had been residents together 40 years ago. He retired last year, moved to Connecticut, bought a boat. He took one look at me and said, "You're awake, and you're planning something." I told him everything. Tom listened, his jaw getting tighter and tighter. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm going to disappear," I said. "Good," Tom said. "Tell me how I can help." The next visitor was my lawyer, David Chen. No relation to Nurse Linda, but just as disgusted when I told him what was happening. David was a first-generation Vietnamese immigrant, built his practice from nothing, and had zero tolerance for entitled rich kids. "You want to change your will," he said. It wasn't a question. "I want to do more than that," I said. "I want to make sure they can't touch anything. And I want them to know why." We spent 2 hours going over options. David brought in a notary, a witness from the hospital staff. We rewrote everything. The new will was simple. If my children contested anything, they got nothing. Zero. The entire estate would go to Mount Sinai's Cardiac Research Fund in Sarah's name. If they accepted the will without contest, each would receive $50,000. Enough to make a fresh start if they were smart, not enough to coast on if they weren't. But that wasn't all. David helped me set up offshore accounts, transferred the bulk of my liquid assets to a bank in Portugal. I'd always wanted to visit Portugal. Sarah and I had planned a trip for our 40th anniversary, but she got sick before we could go. It seemed fitting. Tom handled the logistics. Booked a first-class ticket to Lisbon under his name, then transferred it to me. Arranged for an Airbnb in the Alfama district, paid for 6 months up front. Even found an English-speaking doctor there who'd reviewed my records and agreed to take me on as a patient. Nurse Linda became my co-conspirator. She scheduled my discharge for a Tuesday morning when she knew my kids had conflicts. James had a board meeting. Jennifer was doing some wellness retreat in the Catskills. David was pitching investors. I'd heard them discussing their schedules, annoyed they'd have to take turns visiting their dying father. On Monday night, I lay in that bed thinking about everything. 35 years of missed dinners. Birthdays celebrated with expensive gifts instead of presents. Sarah begging me to take a vacation, just one vacation, and me always saying after this surgery, after this conference, after this patient. I'd sacrificed my marriage, my health, my happiness to give my kids every advantage. And I'd raised 3 vultures. No, that wasn't fair to vultures. At least vultures waited until you were actually dead. I thought about Sarah's last words. She'd seen it coming. She'd watched me indulge them, bail them out of every mistake, smooth every rough path. She'd tried to warn me, but I was too stubborn, too proud of being a good provider to see I was being a terrible father. The truth was, I'd given them everything except consequences, and now they expected the world owed them my life's work. Tuesday morning came. Linda had arranged for me to sign out AMA against medical advice. My cardiologist, Dr. Patel, tried to talk me out of it, but when I looked him in the eye and said, "Would you stay if you were me?" he nodded slowly and signed the forms. Tom picked me up in his Toyota. Nothing flashy. We drove to JFK in silence. At the airport, he pulled me into a hug. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "Send me pictures of the beach." "I will," I promised. "And Tom, thank you for being the family my blood relatives couldn't be." The first-class lounge at JFK was quiet. I called David Chen from a burner phone Tom had bought me. "It's done," I told him. "I'm leaving." "Your children are going to lose their minds," David said with grim satisfaction. "James called my office twice today trying to schedule a meeting about your estate. I told him you're still recovering and haven't made any decisions. Let them think that. I'll be in touch in a few weeks." The flight to Lisbon was 8 hours. I spent most of it staring out the window, thinking about everything and nothing. The woman next to me tried to make conversation, but I politely excused myself. I wasn't ready to tell my story yet. Maybe I never would be. Portugal was beautiful. Even exhausted and heartbroken, I could see that. The Airbnb was a small apartment with a balcony overlooking the Tagus River. The landlord, a kind woman named Christina, showed me around and told me to call if I needed anything. That first night I stood on the balcony and cried. For Sarah. For the children I thought I had. For the life I'd built that turned out to be a house of cards. I cried until there was nothing left, and then I went to bed and slept for 14 hours straight. I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My kids had discovered I was gone. James, Dad, where are you? The hospital says you checked out. Call me immediately. Jennifer, Daddy, I'm so worried. Please call me back. David, Dad, please let us know you're okay. We're scared. I turned the phone off. Let them be scared. Let them feel one fraction of what I felt hearing them plan my funeral while I was still breathing. Over the next week, I established a routine. Morning walks along the river. Afternoons at a local cafe where I practice my terrible Portuguese with patient locals. Evenings reading on the balcony. I found a British expat support group that met weekly at a pub in Bairro Alto. They welcomed me without questions. At one of those meetings I met Helena. She was 68, Portuguese-American, had moved back to Lisbon 5 years ago after her own children tried to force her into assisted living in Florida so they could sell her house. She understood exactly what I was going through. The hardest part isn't the betrayal, she said over wine one evening. It's accepting that the children you love don't actually exist. They're strangers who happen to share your DNA. How did you get past it? I asked. I built a new life, made new friends, found people who valued me for who I am, not what I could give them. She smiled. It took time, but eventually, I stopped mourning the children I thought I had and started enjoying the freedom I'd earned. 3 weeks after I arrived in Portugal, David Chen sent me a video file. He'd hidden cameras in my hospital room after the kids' first visit. I watched the footage of my children dividing up my life like they were splitting a restaurant bill, James calculating values, Jennifer arguing she should get the summer house, David mostly quiet but not objecting. And then the moment I'd overheard. Fuck his wishes. We earned this money. Should I send this to them? David asked when I called him. No, I said. Not yet. Let them wonder. Let them panic. They spent weeks planning my estate while I was alive. They can spend a few more weeks contemplating their choices. But I did authorize David to send each of them a letter. Not from me. From him, as my attorney. The letters were identical. Dr. Richard Thompson has instructed me to inform you that his estate plans have been revised. He is currently traveling and will contact you when and if he chooses to do so. In the meantime, he asks that you do not attempt to locate him or access any of his accounts. Any such attempts will be considered harassment and will result in permanent disinheritance. Regards, David Chen Esquire. According to David, Jennifer called his office sobbing. James threatened to sue. David, the youngest, didn't respond at all. 2 months into my Portuguese adventure, I received an email from David, my son, not my lawyer. The subject line was just, "I'm sorry." The email was long. He talked about how he'd been influenced by James, how he'd been desperate for money to fund his startup, how he knew it was wrong but convinced himself it was justified. He said he'd been going to therapy, that he'd realized how toxic his relationship with his siblings had become, that he understood if I never forgave him. "I don't expect anything from you," he wrote. "I don't want your money. I just want you to know that I'm ashamed of who I was in that hospital. You deserved better. Mom deserved better. I'm working on being better." I didn't respond immediately. I sat with it for a week. Talked it through with Helena, with Tom, with some of the expats who'd become my friends. Everyone had opinions, but ultimately it was my choice. Finally I replied, "Thank you for your honesty. I'm not ready to see you or talk yet, but I appreciate you taking responsibility. That's more than your siblings have done." 3 days later, I received another email. This one from Jennifer. It was full of excuses and justifications. She talked about her business struggles, her mounting debts, the pressure she was under. She never once actually apologized. James didn't email at all. Instead, he tried to freeze my accounts. David Chen called me, barely containing his laughter. "Your idiot son tried to get a judge to declare you mentally incompetent and grant him power of attorney," he said. "I submitted the hospital records showing you were fully coherent when you left, along with doctor and time, Patel's statement that you were of sound mind." The judge dismissed it in about 30 seconds and warned James about filing frivolous motions. "What did James do?" I asked. "Looked like he'd been slapped with a dead fish," David said with satisfaction. 4 months in, I bought an apartment in Lisbon. 2 bedrooms, balcony with ocean views, walking distance to everything. Christina helped me with the paperwork, and suddenly I was an official Portuguese resident. I enrolled in Portuguese classes at the university, made friends with my neighbors, started volunteering at a free clinic in one of the poorer neighborhoods, doing basic health consultations. For the first time in decades, I wasn't Dr. Richard Thompson, renowned cardiac surgeon. I was just Richard, an American retiree, learning to order coffee in Portuguese and laughing at his own terrible accent. Helena and I grew closer. Nothing romantic at first, just two people who understood each other's pain. But eventually, over sunset walks and shared dinners and conversations that lasted until midnight, something shifted. 6 months after I arrived in Portugal, she kissed me on the Ponte 25 de Abril, and I felt something I hadn't felt since Sarah died. Hope. 1 year after I left, David Chen called with news. Jennifer's wellness business had collapsed. She'd filed for bankruptcy. James and Lisa were getting divorced, apparently. Lisa had been quite vocal about her disappointment that the expected inheritance hadn't materialized. David, my son, had gotten a regular job at a tech company, giving up on the startup dream. "Do you want to reach out to any of them?" David asked. "Not yet," I said. "Maybe someday, but not yet." That evening I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to my children, to Sarah. I told her everything. About the hospital, the betrayal, the escape, the new life I'd built. I told her about Helena, and how I hoped she'd approve. I told her I finally understood what she'd been trying to tell me in those last days. I ended the letter. "You were right, I was too soft. But you were also wrong about one thing. It's never too late to learn. I'm learning every day. I'm learning to live for myself. I'm learning to forgive myself. I'm learning that family is who you choose, not just who you're born to. I miss you every day. But I'm okay. Finally, I'm okay." I folded the letter and put it in a drawer with her picture. Then I walked out onto my balcony, where Helena was waiting with 2 glasses of wine and a smile. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I'm thinking about how much of my life I wasted chasing the wrong things," I said, "trying to buy love with money, trying to make up for absence with gifts." "And now?" Helena asked. "Now I'm learning to just be present, to show up, to appreciate what I have instead of mourning what I lost." I looked out at the ocean, at the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I have less money than I did. I live in a country where I barely speak the language. I'm estranged from 2 of my 3 children. "But," Helena prompted. "But I'm happier than I've been in 30 years, I admitted. I wake up excited for the day. I go to bed satisfied. I have friends who actually like me, not what I can do for them. I'm learning and growing and living, not just existing between surgeries." Helena raised her glass. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," I echoed. My phone buzzed. A text from David, my son. "Got my 1-year sober chip today. Thought you'd want to know. Still in therapy. Still working on being better. Hope you're well, wherever you are." I showed the message to Helena. "What do you think?" "I think everyone deserves a chance to grow," she said. "But that doesn't mean you owe him forgiveness on his timeline." She was right, I responded. "Congratulations. That takes real courage. I'm proud of you for doing the work." That night, I lay in bed, thinking about my children. James, still angry and entitled, blaming everyone but himself. Jennifer, drowning in consequences she'd refused to see coming. And David, struggling but trying. Maybe someday I'd reconnect with David. Maybe we could rebuild something real, based on honesty instead of obligation. Maybe I'd even forgive James and Jennifer, though I'd never forget what they'd revealed about themselves. But that was a problem for future Richard. Present Richard had a Portuguese class in the morning, lunch plans with Helena, and a volunteer shift at the clinic in the afternoon. Present Richard was learning that revenge wasn't about making people suffer. It was about refusing to let them steal your peace. I'd spent 60 years building a life that wasn't actually mine, working for children who saw me as a bank account, living in a city that ground me down, trapped by expectations and obligations and the sunk cost fallacy of a life I'd invested too much in to walk away from, until I did walk away. And on the other side of that terrifying leap, I found something I never expected. Not just freedom, not just peace. I found myself. The real Richard Thompson. Not the surgeon, not the provider, not the disappointed father. Just a man learning Portuguese badly, falling in love at 62, and watching the sunset over the Tagus River with a glass of wine and a smile. I didn't need $8 million to be rich. I just needed to stop giving myself away to people who never valued what they had. 3 days ago, I visited Sarah's grave. I'd arranged for Tom to place flowers there every month, but this was my first trip back since leaving. I stood there in the cold November air, hands in my pockets, and told her everything. I finally learned to say no, I told her headstone. I learned that the best gift I could give our children wasn't money, it was boundaries, consequences, reality. I learned that love without respect isn't actually love, it's enabling. I learned that it's never too late to start over, to choose yourself, to build a life worth living instead of a life worth inheriting. I learned that you were right, about everything. I placed fresh flowers on her grave, her favorite, white roses, and walked away. Not with anger, not with regret, with gratitude, because sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is the best thing that can happen for you. My heart attack didn't just save my life, it gave me a reason to finally live it. And that, more than any amount of money, more than any restored relationship with my children, more than any professional achievement that was worth everything,